Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Despite advances in cancer treatment, many people have recurrences. What can we learn from those who survive against all odds? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Spontaneous remissions are recognized by oncologists but are a medical mystery. Because they're rare and unpredictable, doctors don't know what to make of them. But Dr. Kelly Turner has interviewed many of these people for the Radical Remission Project.
We need to be looking down every avenue that we can and to not look at people who are standing right in front of us and who have healed is scientifically irresponsible.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, what lessons can we learn from those who've experienced radical remissions from a terminal diagnosis?
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, recommendations on when and how often women should get mammograms to detect breast cancer have been confusing, contradictory, and controversial. Starting regular screening at age 40, as recommended by the American Cancer Society, risks finding false positives in women who don't really have breast cancer. Waiting until age 50 to begin regular mammograms poses the risk of possibly missing a cancer in a younger woman. The American College of Physicians has just endorsed 50 as the usual starting age for breast cancer screening. The organization said that younger women should be fully informed of the risks and benefits so they can participate in the decisions.
Women who have dense breasts have long been told this increases their risk of breast cancer and makes it more difficult to detect, a sort of catch-22. Sometimes additional imaging, such as an MRI, is recommended. But a new study points out that nearly half of all women have dense breast tissue, and most of them are not at increased risk. So who needs additional screening? The study shows that best results are from screening women who have a high risk of breast cancer in addition to dense breasts. Those with a 5-year risk at 2.5% or higher should discuss additional screening with their doctors. According to the study, if 694 women received these extra tests, one additional cancer would be found.
Cholesterol-lowering drugs are usually prescribed to reduce the risk of heart attacks in middle-aged people. A new study published in the BMJ shows that these medications also seem to help prevent strokes in older people. The researchers tracked nearly 7,500 French men and women around 74 years old for 9 years. The subjects lived in Dijon, Bordeaux, and Montpellier and were healthy at the beginning of the study. By the end, the researchers found that individuals taking either statins, such as simvastatin, or fibrates like fenofibrate to control cholesterol, were 30% less likely to have suffered a stroke. The absolute risk was very low, however, less than 1 person per 200 person years. So it's important to consider whether an older person is able to take the preventive medication without troublesome side effects. One surprising finding was that there was not a lower risk of heart disease among the older people taking cholesterol-lowering medicines.
Irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, has long been a mystery to doctors. It causes the sufferer cramps, constipation or diarrhea, and a lot of other digestive distress. But until now, gastroenterologists could find no reason for the symptoms and considered IBS largely psychological. They call it functional bowel disorder, and it afflicts nearly 40 million Americans. Now there's both a non-psychological explanation and a test for the condition that may help with treatment. Dr. Mark Pimentel has found that toxins produced by a bacterial infection, such as a bout of food poisoning, can harm nerves vital to digestive system function. They can also trigger an ongoing immune system reaction long after patients have recovered from the infection itself. Now Dr. Pimentel and his colleagues have developed a test for antibodies to the toxins. The test was validated in a study of almost 3,000 people with and without IBS or other digestive disorders.
A presentation at the Digestive Disease Week annual meeting demonstrated the effectiveness of enteric-coated peppermint oil for relieving symptoms of IBS. A small double-blind study compared slow-release, ultra-purified peppermint oil to placebo. After 24 hours, the peppermint oil had reduced symptoms by 30% compared to about 20% with placebo. By the time the volunteers had received the treatment for 4 weeks, those getting peppermint oil had nearly 80% fewer symptoms compared to a 40% reduction in the placebo group. The investigators believe that L-menthol delivered to the small intestine is the active component. Because all the study participants were selected according to strict criteria for IBS, this is the most rigorous study to date of a traditional folk remedy for tummy troubles. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Cancer is a mysterious and frightening disease. Some people do extremely well with conventional treatments such as chemotherapy or radiation. Others don't respond or can't tolerate the usual treatments. Once in a while, a person who's been diagnosed with a terminal cancer surprises the oncologists with a seemingly miraculous recovery. Are there lessons we can learn from people who have experienced spontaneous remissions?
Dr. Kelly Turner is a psychotherapist, researcher, and counselor in the field of integrative oncology. She founded the Radical Remission Project and interviewed many individuals who had experienced spontaneous reversals of serious cancer diagnoses. Her best-selling book is Radical Remission.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Turner.
Thanks for having me, Joe and Terry. I'm really excited to be here.
We are excited to have you on the People's Pharmacy as well. Let me ask you my toughest question of the day, if you don't mind. You know, every once in a while, you'll see in the medical literature or you will hear from an oncologist about a patient who has been diagnosed with terminal cancer, maybe at best with 6 months to live. And then something miraculous happens. There's a spontaneous remission. Now, doctors acknowledge that these cases occur, but it always makes them a little uncomfortable, or at least it seems to. And spontaneous remission is almost never studied. Why not?
That was my question. That was definitely my question when I came across my first case. I said, why is no one studying this? I mean, here's a case of some gentleman with stage 4 cancer who was sent home on hospice because his doctor said there's nothing more we can do. And he's here 20 years later. So why aren't we studying him? I think the reason is because it's very hard for doctors to study something that they can't explain. They are steeped in medical education for, usually around 10 years. In pharmacology, psychopharmacology, surgery, they have certain tools that they're trained in. So when someone heals from a devastating disease without using the tools that they were trained in, they can be amazed and they can be happy for that person. But because they can't explain it, it doesn't really give them a lot of impetus to go and study it.
We talked to one of the country's leading cancer experts, and he said, it's just so rare. It's rare as hen's teeth. I mean, we just don't know what to do about it. And there's nothing we can learn from it. And so studying it, well, it's almost impossible. And that was an unsatisfying answer.
That would be an unsatisfying answer to me as well. First of all, I would say it's not as rare as everyone thinks. And in fact, one of my big goals with this research is to really figure out how often it's happening. It's not being tracked. Radical remissions are not being tracked in the National Cancer Registry. So the only way doctors have of hearing about it is if it happens in their practice. And so they think, oh, that just happened once. But it's actually happened to every oncologist I've ever met. And no one is reporting these cases in a central location. So the current estimation is 1 out of 65,000 cases are radical remissions. I think it's much higher than that. I think that for every 1 case that's published, there are 100 more that go unpublished. And we have 1,000 cases currently published. So I think there's quite a few more cases of radical remission happening than we currently know about. And I think to not study something because you can't explain it is scientifically irresponsible. So if someone flew to the moon yesterday from their backyard, it would make front page news, right? NASA and researchers would want to investigate how that person managed to do that. My question is, why aren't we doing that for someone who turns around stage 4 cancer? It's, in my opinion, just as important and just as revolutionary. Many of the people that I've spoken to in my research for these past 10 years tell me that I'm the first person in a research capacity to ask them what they did to get well. They said their doctors were happy for them, but never asked them what they did.
Now, you've been talking about radical remission, and I wonder if you can give us a brief definition. What do you mean by that term?
Radical remission, also known as spontaneous remission in the medical field, is any cancer that goes away in a way that is statistically unexpected. So to get a little more specific, what that means is that when someone heals from cancer without using conventional medicine, or after conventional medicine has done all that it can, and then they're forced to use other methods. So that's the traditional definition. So someone who's healing from cancer without Western medicine. I add a third category, or I have added a third category, which is when someone uses complementary medicine and conventional medicine at the same time to overcome a very serious cancer diagnosis, such as pancreatic cancer or advanced lung cancer. But in my book and in my research so far, I only cover the first 2 categories, which is when people are healing without Western medicine.
Now, please tell us, if you would, Dr. Turner, how did you first become interested in cancer research in general? And what led you on this quest concerning radical remissions in particular?
I started off just counseling cancer patients. That was my calling. That's what I wanted to do. And that was because I had lost loved ones to cancer. When I was 16, a dear friend of mine died of stomach cancer. And I think that was just a very formative event for me. I didn't really realize until later how formative it really was. But when it came to, after my years at Harvard and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my career and everything, I started volunteering with cancer patients, and it completely drew me in. It was where my heart wanted to be. So I went back to graduate school for counseling so that I could do counseling with cancer patients and help them with that emotional journey. And that was my plan. That was the only thing that I had on the books. I wasn't going to do anything other than that, and I really enjoyed it. But one day, while I was counseling, I came across a case of radical remission, and it just kind of cracked my world open. I said, how come I haven't heard about this person before? This man turned around his stage 4 kidney cancer, and this should have been on the front page of the newspapers. And the book that I was reading was 10 years old. So I was just sort of shocked that I hadn't heard about this person. And then I went home and did a little research, and I found that there were over 1,000 of these cases sitting there in medical journals quietly. No one was talking about them. No one was studying them. No one was gathering them all together and looking for common threads. And, as someone who was touched by cancer and was working with cancer patients who frankly were dying every week in front of my eyes, which was emotionally very difficult, it just didn't make sense that here we have these amazing survivors and no one's looking at them. And so, I was in grad school at the time, for counseling, and I just decided to keep going for my PhD in this and really, really dig into these thousands of cases since no one else was doing it.
Dr. Turner, can you tell us a few more details about that gentleman who first caught your attention with his kidney cancer?
Yeah, absolutely. His name is Shin Terayama, and he is a wonderful, wonderful man from Japan. He was diagnosed with stage 4. Well, at first it wasn't stage 4, but he was diagnosed with advanced kidney cancer when he was in his mid-40s. And he was a workaholic at the time in Japan. He was running his own business and working, 18-hour days and, sleeping for 3 hours at a time and really just pushing his body to the limit. And when he finally took time off of work to go see the doctor, he had very, very advanced kidney cancer. And they did everything they could. They did surgery. They removed one of his kidneys. He did multiple rounds of chemotherapy, multiple rounds of radiation. But unfortunately, nothing was working, and it had spread to his lungs and other places in his body. So after about 2 years of treatment, he was sent home on hospice, and the Japanese doctor said, unfortunately, Shin, there's nothing more we can do. And so he went home to spend his remaining days with his wife and his 2 children. And when he left the hospital, that was when he sort of decided to start just doing whatever felt right. And he wasn't gung-ho about, I'm going to heal this and I'm not going to die. He just went home and wanted to start feeling better. And he started making simple changes. One of the first things he did was start drinking filtered water. The water that he drank out of the tap tasted terrible to him, probably because of the chemotherapy and radiation that he'd been on. So just this first simple step of drinking filtered water made him feel better. So he kept doing it. He also started watching the sunrise every day. He'd go up to the roof of his apartment building and watch the sunrise because he was so grateful to be alive for one more day with his wife and children. And he just started making change after change after change. He changed his diet. He really worked emotionally on loving his cancer. It sounds ironic, but he sent love to his cancer. He wanted to heal it, and so the way that made sense to him was to send love to it. And he also worked on meditation. He didn't even know it was meditation, but he was up on the roof breathing deeply for about an hour before and after sunrise. And anyway, he just kept living, and he didn't die like his doctors told him he would in 3 months. And after a while, he went back into his doctor's office, and they said, oh my gosh, you're still here. Let's give you a scan. And they scanned him, and his tumors were shrinking. And he kept doing that. And about 2.5 years later, after this continual, both, nutritional and emotional and spiritual, I'll say spiritual because I mean meditation work, he was cancer-free. And that was more than 25 years ago.
You're listening to Dr. Kelly Turner. She's author of Radical Remission, Surviving Cancer Against All Odds. She's also a researcher and a counselor in integrative oncology. She founded the Radical Remission Project, which collects stories of spontaneous remission.
And speaking of stories, that was an amazing one. I mean, who can believe it?
That is the story of Shin Terayama, quite extraordinary.
We need to take a short break. Afterwards, we'll find out what the very different people Dr. Turner talked with have in common.
What are the 9 key factors that make a difference? How difficult would you find it to adopt these practices?
Choosing a healing modality can sometimes be quite confusing. What role could intuition play in making that choice?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Redix Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
And by Squatty Potty Toilet Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. This is show number 955. That phone number, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're discussing the strange phenomenon of spontaneous remission of cancer.
Our guest is Dr. Kelly Turner. She's a researcher and counselor in the field of integrative oncology and author of the book Radical Remission. She founded the Radical Remission Project, in which people who have experienced spontaneous remissions of cancer share their stories.
Dr. Turner, you've described how you have interviewed a number of cancer patients who have turned their cancers around and found that there are quite a few common threads in their stories. I wonder if you would summarize those for us quite briefly.
I'd be happy to. I always like to say that my research is preliminary. I'm one of the first people to really look at this group of survivors as a whole. So my research is to try to figure out how and why are these people getting better. But the results are definitely preliminary, so they shouldn't be considered final or conclusive or causative. So the 9 key factors that I'm about to list off are simply the common threads that I've observed, and it's going to take years and years of clinical trials for us to determine if these really statistically make a difference in cancer survival. But knowing that caveat, I'm happy to share these 9 common threads that I've found amongst the radical remission survivors that I've studied for the past 10 years. 2 of them are physical. The rest are emotional or spiritual, and that really surprised me. But the 2 physical ones were radically changing your diet and also taking herbs and supplements, which, of course, Joe and Terry, you guys are the experts on this topic, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on those later. The other 7, as I mentioned, were emotional or spiritual, and let's see, they range, and I'm not listing these in order of importance. That's another thing to notice, is that these are just the 9 common threads. There's no ranking order as of yet. But the other 7 include taking an active role in your health, taking control of your health, letting your intuition play a part in making your health-related decisions, releasing suppressed emotions, any emotions that you're holding on to in your body, also taking time every day to increase positive emotions, trying to find some time each day to feel joy or happiness, even if it's just 5 minutes, embracing social support, so letting the love from your friends and family or even your pets flood in and help your oxytocin levels, which is a wonderful healing hormone, deepening your spiritual connection or your spiritual practice. So again, this is not about what you believe or what you don't believe. It's about taking time to participate in a spiritual practice, such as prayer or meditation, that literally changes your bloodstream for the better. And then also having strong reasons for living is another one that came up over and over again. That's different than fighting for your life or fighting your cancer. It's also different than trying to avoid death. There's a subtle distinction there, but the people that I study really simply had strong reasons for wanting to stay in their bodies as long as possible. Some of them were afraid of death, some of them were not. Some of them were fighting their cancer, most of them were not. But all of them had strong reasons for living.
Now, I apologize for this question, Dr. Turner, but I suspect that there are oncologists listening to us right now who may be saying, Dr. Turner, you are raising false hope. Remissions are really, really, really rare, and most people will not experience a remission even if they follow some of the things that you're talking about in your book, or even all of them. What do you say to such an oncologist?
Well, I say 2 things. The first thing I'd say is that false hope is only false if what I'm speaking is false. So the people that I study are true. They actually happened. They actually had cancer, and they actually got well. So I'm not lying. I'm not talking about people that don't exist. I'm sharing true stories of people who truthfully had cancer and then got well. So that's an important thing to remember, is that these cases do happen. But secondly, it would only be false hope is if I were to say, do these 9 things and you will cure your cancer. Of course, that would be a terrible thing to say and a terrible promise to make. And I don't even come close to doing that in my book. The first thing I say in my introduction is that I'm not against Western medicine at all. I simply study this very unique control group. And I'm also very quick to say that these are just observations. That's all they are right now. They aren't guarantees and they aren't promises that this will help you get better. But what I think is worse than raising false hope, and I truly believe that if people read my book, they'll realize that I'm not doing that. But what's far worse than false hope in my mind is ignoring these cases completely. And that is what doctors have been doing out of fear of raising false hope. They've been silencing these true cases. And we have so much to learn about healing and cancer. We don't have a cure for cancer yet. I wish we did. I wish there were one magic bullet that we could find tomorrow in a laboratory and then we could give to everyone in a pill. I really do. But until we have that solution, we need to be looking down every avenue that we can, and to not look at people who are standing right in front of us and who have healed is scientifically irresponsible. I would say to that oncologist, I'm sure he took research back in his med school days, just like I took many, many research courses. And one of the first things my professors at Berkeley told me is that you have to study your anomalies because your anomalies mess up your model. So when you're a scientist and you're trying to explain something, you come up with an explanation or a hypothetical model of why something might be happening. And if someone falls out of that model and is way off your graph, that's an anomaly. And you have to go, as a scientist, you have to go study them and try to figure out why they didn't conform to your graph. Why didn't they fall into your hypothesis? And for decades, for a century now, oncologists have been ignoring these anomalies of radical remissions out of the fear of raising false hope. And what I would say is that that's not the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing is to investigate them fully and then work on trying to adjust your hypothetical model so that these people can fit back in. And what these people have told me in terms of my research and my hypotheses about what's going on with cancer and healing is that we probably need to adjust our model a bit. Because the fact that these people are healing at all means that we have something to learn about the body's ability to heal. And so we need to adjust what we're offering to people in terms of options for healing. And you guys are experts in that. You know, food and nutrition and supplements, we're learning more and more that these are incredibly powerful medicines that we can give to our bodies. And right now, doctors in med school are only given 1 week of nutrition education. So there's a lot we can learn from these cases, and in fact, it's our responsibility to study them.
Dr. Turner, we had the honor of interviewing Dr. David Servan-Schreiber several years ago before he died. He had been diagnosed with brain cancer terminally and had a recurrence, and then defied his physicians by living, I don't know, some amazing number of years, 19 years, which was unheard of for the kind of brain cancer that he had. And he said there's something far worse than giving people false hope.
And it's really just the opposite, giving them a false sense of there is no hope, false hopelessness.
Or despair. And this notion of false hopelessness, I mean, it's tragic, but that is oftentimes what people are told. You have 6 months to live. Get your affairs in order, without even contemplating the possibility of survival. I wonder if you could share another story with us from someone that you've actually interviewed and interacted with over the last several years.
Sure. Well, I know that your listeners are interested in diet and herbs and supplements, so I could bring up my dear friend Anne Fonfa. Anne was diagnosed with breast cancer many, many years ago, and it just kept coming back. Everything she tried, she actually was so chemically sensitive that she couldn't tolerate chemo. She would break out into hives all over her body. And radiation was the same thing. She just had a very, very sensitive body. And so she kept having surgery after surgery after surgery, but the cancer kept coming back. And her doctors also were putting her in that position of hopelessness, of saying, there's really no more we can do. Your body can't tolerate the chemotherapy. It can't tolerate radiation. We can try to cut it out again, but it just keeps coming back. And she was forced to go look for other options because they told her there's nothing more we can offer you. So she went looking, and she just did her own research and her own homework. This was, I think almost 20 years ago now. So she first started by changing her diet, and she worked on her stress and, reduced that, of course, and exercised and started getting into things like yoga and meditation, and all of it was helping. She knew it was helping. She was also taking many, many supplements, and she could see that her tumor markers were stabilizing. So in the blood work she was getting, things were stabilizing. But the tumors weren't going away. They were growing much more slowly than they had been. So she knew that what she was doing was making a big difference. But they weren't going away. And her doctors were thrilled with the fact that with all these different methods and stuff, that she was slowing things down. But they still didn't have any other ideas for her. And she went and did the Gerson therapy and did enemas and lots of juicing. She really tried everything that anyone told her about, acupuncture, all that stuff. And things were improving, but they weren't there yet. The tumors were still growing, but at a much slower rate. For her, the final change that she needed to make was taking Chinese herbs. So she connected with an herbalist in New York City, and he felt her pulse and looked at her tongue and asked her some questions. And he actually asked her to go off supplements. He said, I don't want those to interfere with my herbs. And she said, no, I can't go off these supplements. I know they have been slowing my cancer down. So he said, all right, you can stay on them. But he made her up a very individualized packet of herbs to boil and drink as teas. And instantly she noticed that her body was much less sensitive. She had a little reaction at first to the herbs, and then after a few days, everything in her body sort of calmed down. I mean, this was a woman who couldn't be around perfume. And suddenly her body started to calm down to that reactivity. And for Anne, it was the Chinese herbs that led to the remission, along with all the other things that she had added in. But that final straw were the herbs. And I bring that up not only because I think your listeners are interested in things like herbs and natural supplements, but also because it brings up a really nice point that the people that I study brought home to me. And I study both alternative healers and radical remission survivors. And what they all say is that everyone has a different change they need to make. Now, Western doctors hate when I say that, because that's not the Western medical model, right? We want one cure for the one disease. We want one pill that's going to fix everybody with cancer. And we haven't had much luck in finding that one pill. I'm still, if we found that pill tomorrow, I would be thrilled. But in the past 50 years of this war on cancer, we haven't found it yet. And perhaps the reason why is because cancer is a multifaceted disease that can be caused by many different things. So for Anne, the change that her body needed her to make after she made all the other wonderful changes in diet and exercise and stress reduction, for her the final step was the herbs. I have other people that I've studied who actually didn't change their diet very much, only took a couple herbs, but radically changed their emotional life, radically let go of anger and resentment that they'd been holding on to for decades. And for them, that was the change that their bodies needed to make. So I guess that's just something I've learned from my decade of research here, which is that, any disease, including cancer, is an alarm bell from your body saying that something's wrong. And it could be that you've got toxins in your office, or it could be that you've got a toxic relationship. But what the people that I study say is that you just need to keep making changes until you find the one that your body needed you to make.
Well, given that each of us would need something different, it sounds as though that intuition piece that you have written about is going to be awfully important for someone trying to figure out which changes are the most critical ones for me to make.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Terry. Intuition coming up as one of the 9 key common threads or key healing factors in my research was a complete surprise to me. I was not expecting that one at all. But it just kept coming up over and over again. Everyone I talked to said, I heard this voice inside my head that said, move to the ocean. Or I just had a feeling that what I really needed to do was, start exercising and get outside and breathe in fresh air. And everyone I've studied has talked about this sort of gut feeling of where they needed to go next for their healing. So yeah, according to the people I study, tapping into that intuition can be really helpful, especially when you're faced with an overwhelming array of paths. Should I go raw? Should I do supplements? Should I see a naturopath? Should I see an acupuncturist? What the people that I study recommend is that you sit down quietly, whether you meditate or you can light a candle or just go somewhere quiet. Try to quiet your thoughts and ask your most inner self, why did I get this disease, and what do I need to do to get better? And not be surprised at what comes up. The science behind intuition is growing. We don't have tons of experiments that we've done on intuition. But when I was researching this for the book, I had to try to find as many studies as I could to try to back up this really surprising finding for me of following your intuition. And actually, what we know about intuition is that it's based in the back of the brain, in the oldest part of our brain, the limbic brain, the reptilian part of our brain, right above the spinal cord. That is where instinct lights up. If you were in an MRI and your instincts kicked in, that's the part of your brain that would become active. And it's a part of our brain that we don't use too much anymore because we don't need to. We don't need to predict the weather anymore. We don't need to sense danger lurking around the corner or behind the bushes. We live in a very technologically advanced, safe, for most of us in this world, thankfully, we live in a safe place where we don't have to predict a hurricane. But that part of our brain is still there, and when we are in danger, it kicks in. So I think that's probably why the people that I study tapped into that part of their brain, is because they were in danger. Their doctors told them, you've got 6 months to live, or there's nothing more we can do for you. And when we hear that, when we even hear the words, you have cancer, we feel in danger. And that's when that limbic part of the brain kicks in. And it knows what to do in terms of danger and safety well before the frontal cortex of the brain knows. The frontal cortex is our thinking part of our brain. And there's some fascinating studies that show that your instinctual brain will know where the danger is and where safety is long before you can explain it, long before your thinking brain even understands what's happening.
You are listening to Dr. Kelly Turner. She's author of Radical Remission, Surviving Cancer Against All Odds. She's also a researcher and counselor in integrative oncology.
We need to take a short break. Coming up, we'll learn how people can take control of their cancer. How can they deal with the fear that's a natural part of such a diagnosis?
When it comes to the immune system, what role do herbs and supplements play?
Are there scientific lessons to be learned from long-term survivors?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening to this podcast of The People's Pharmacy. If you like it, why not rate or review it in the iTunes store? We'd appreciate it.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Squatty Potty Toilet Stools, creating healthy toilet posture for fast, easy elimination. More information about how toilet posture affects your health at squattypotty.com.
And by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. Online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 955. That number again, 800-732-2334, or look for it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
What can we learn about surviving cancer from people who have experienced amazing remissions of their disease? Our guest today discovered a number of key factors that such individuals share.
We're talking with Dr. Kelly Turner. She's author of the New York Times bestseller, Radical Remission, Surviving Cancer Against All Odds. She's also a researcher and counselor in integrative oncology and founder of the Radical Remission Project, which collects stories of people who have spontaneously overcome cancer. Her websites are drkellyturner.com and radicalremission.com. You'll find links to them from our website.
Dr. Turner, when someone gets the diagnosis cancer, quite often their brain just stops working, shuts down, and they don't hear another word the oncologist or doctor says to them, and the world turns upside down. And it is a time when people feel totally out of control because there's oftentimes a treatment program that is laid out for them. First there's surgery, then there's chemotherapy, there may be follow-up radiation, and it just feels so overwhelming. You talk about taking control. So how do we reverse this entire process of out of control?
Well, first you need to sit with the fear that comes up. I think part of the reason you feel so out of control is because that word cancer has so much fear behind it. So certainly one of the key factors in my book, and one of the key factors of the people that I study, is taking control of their health. But they only seem to do that once they can get out of that paralysis of fear. So probably the first step would be to feel the fear, allow yourself to look at it. At least this is what the people I study recommend doing. They recommend really letting yourself feel that fear fully. And, whether you're working with a therapist or a trusted friend, allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, process it, and then try to let it go, because it is paralyzing, not only emotionally and mentally, but for your immune system. Because when you're in fear, you're in fight or flight mode. And your body has two modes of operating, fight or flight or rest and repair. Those are the two modes of operating in our nervous system. And the immune system happens in rest and repair. It does not happen if you are in fight or flight. But fear is inevitable when you have a cancer diagnosis. So I don't want people to think, oh gosh, I can never be afraid, otherwise my immune system won't work. What you need to do is let yourself feel the fear, look at it, process it, maybe journal about it, and try to find moments where you do let it go. At first, you might not have many moments at all, but little by little, you want to do things to distract yourself from the fear so that you can get into that rest and repair mode. And that's how people take control, right? They start by saying, okay, I'm out of control. I don't know what I'm doing. And then they carve out 5 minutes where they say, I'm just going to talk to my friend who knows about diet for 5 minutes, because more than that will overwhelm me, right? So the people that I study seem to take control often little by little, a little more each day. And it's a slow process. You have to deal with so much information and so many emotions. But if you can find coping mechanisms to help you with your emotions, and if you can find trusted sources of information for all the things that are pouring in at you, right? You're going to have friends calling you about this and that, and try acupuncture and try my healer, and you got to eat yams or something. Find a way to limit that information in a way that you can digest it and start working on it little by little. In terms of taking control, all of the people that I study do all of the 9 factors. So, and we talked about Shin before, and he's the feature story in the Taking Control chapter. But another person who took control in my research is Jenny, and she was actually in the herbs chapter. But of course, they all do all 9 things. So, I could talk about any of them for any of these factors.
Well, in fact, you had just mentioned the immune system, and you mentioned in the chapter on herbs and supplements that often the point of taking supplements or herbs is to strengthen the immune system. And then you tell the story of Jenny, and I'm thinking Jenny is a great story, not only about supplements, but even more about taking control. Would you tell us about her, please?
Yeah, Jenny is a wonderful, wonderful human being. She took the bull by the horns when it came to her cancer. She really took control. It was hard for me to pick which chapter to put her in. She was diagnosed with a very rare form of lymphoma. She actually had to push her doctor to figure out her exact diagnosis. So lymphoma is a very difficult to diagnose form of cancer. It's cancer of the lymph system. And it can have many different subtypes. And so her subtype ended up being splenic marginal zone lymphoma, which means it involves the spleen. And she knew from the get-go that she wanted to be informed of what was going on with her body because she was perfectly healthy in her mind. She found her cancer accidentally. She was getting ready for a very minor elective surgery for something totally unrelated. And during the scanning process for that, they found that her spleen was huge. And so that led to a bunch of testing. And then she found out that she had, stage 4 lymphoma. And suddenly things were out of control and really scary and everything. And her attitude was she was just not going to take any nonsense from anyone. She wanted to know everything about what was happening. She requested all of her medical records every time, which, by the way, every patient has a right to do. And she found resources that would help her understand these reports. And she didn't just get a second opinion. She got a third and a fourth opinion because with this particular type of lymphoma, one doctor was recommending, instant chemotherapy, 4 different chemotherapies, actually 5. And another doctor at a different hospital said, I think that we could watch and wait and you could really work on boosting your immune system. So she was finally given the choice, which doctor to go with here. It was either 5 chemotherapies, which would knock out her immune system and hopefully knock out the cancer, or follow this other doctor's recommendation, which was to watch and wait while doing everything she could in terms of diet and nutrition and supplements and other things to boost her immune system. This was a really hard decision for her because her spleen was about to burst. Her doctor said, I'm afraid of you wearing a seatbelt because if you came to a sudden stop in your car, that seatbelt could press against your spleen and it could rupture, which would not be good. So things were pretty dire, but again, her intuition told her not to do the chemo right now. It would always be there waiting for her. She could use it whenever she really needed to, but she was drawn towards trying to boost her immune system as opposed to knock it down with the chemotherapy. And she completely changed her diet. She started eating vegetables again. She'd been basically eating frozen food for a decade because she was on a weight loss plan, one of these programs where you eat their frozen meals. So she started eating fresh food, she started juicing, and she started feeling better. And she could feel her spleen get smaller. She could feel it getting smaller, which was incredible. And then for her, she did a lot of emotional work. But for her, one of the main healing factors for her was taking supplements. And she took a lot. She took a whole host of things. And I won't list them because it's not that all the people I study took the same supplements. Everybody took the supplements that their particular body needed. So I think if I list them, I might mislead your listeners into thinking that they need to go out and get those ones right away. She worked with naturopathic doctors and integrative doctors and nutritionists to find out what her body was deficient in. And by doing that, she boosted her immune system and she literally felt her spleen shrink. And, a year or so later, everything was fine.
Dr. Turner, we have a term for people like Jenny. We call them e-patients, engaged, empowered, people who are really actively involved in figuring out what they need to do.
Absolutely. That's Jenny to a T. She unfortunately ticked off a lot of her doctors along the way.
Well, e-patients can do that.
Yeah. And I talk about that in my research about how most of the people that I study, these radical remission survivors, are labeled as bad patients by their doctors because they're annoying. They question, they bring in studies, they email their doctors at night and they say, I found this study on PubMed, what do you think? And it takes a really open doctor to not feel challenged by that. And Jenny really went through about 3 or 4 doctors in her HMO before she found one that wasn't threatened by her research at night. She did research on PubMed. She's a very smart woman. And she also had a whole cadre of complementary practitioners who were advising her, nutritionists, naturopaths, and so on. So she considered her oncologist just part of her team. And she always talked about how in those first few doctors that she went through, she said, and I knew he wasn't going to be part of my team when he didn't even look at my latest report, which I had requested before my appointment so that I could take a look at it. She really went above and beyond when it came to taking control of her health and requesting medical records and all of that.
I have a question about what I'm going to call long-term survivors versus the radical remission cases that you've dealt with. Most of your cases have to do with people who have, like you say, stage 4 cancer, have a very short time to live, maybe 6 months or at best a year with the best of therapies, and then go on to live what would be considered a normal life expectancy without any clear explanation from the medical field. But there are other patients who have very similar situation, and instead of dying within 6 months or a year or 2 years, go on to live 5, 6, 10, 15, 20 years. And then sometimes the cancer does come back. But these long-term survivors seem also very puzzling to the medical profession. They often say, well, there's something about the tumor. You know, it's the genes, or it's the kind of cancer. There's aggressive cancer, and then there's slow-growing cancer. And I'm just wondering if you've thought about that versus the patient.
What Dr. Servan-Schreiber referred to as the terrain, the soil in which the cancer might have taken root. And if you can change that soil and make it inhospitable to the cancer may not go away, but it also may not take over.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought up that idea of the terrain of the body, because that is where cancer research is going. At first, for the past 50 years and the early part of those 50 years, the focus was on using chemo to kill cancer cells. And then lately we've been looking at other things, whereas using chemotherapy to, choke off the blood supply of a tumor, or to, not allow the tumor to communicate in certain ways. So we're broadening back, right? So we're not just trying to kill it, we're now just trying to disarm it, right? The research that's happening now, which I think is really fascinating, is looking at the chemical terrain, or the microenvironment of the body and the bloodstream, and how that affects cancer cells. Because, and this is what the people that I study say. They say, I changed the internal environment of my body. I used both physical things like diet and herbs, as well as my emotional patterns, because we know that our emotions lead to chemical bursts of hormones that flood the bloodstream. They used these 9 things to change the terrain of their body. Now, I'm not a biologist and microbiologist, but I've interviewed some really fascinating integrative oncologists. One of them is a doctor in Japan, Dr. Kobayashi, who believes very firmly that cancer is caused by mitochondrial failure. And mitochondria in the cells can be damaged for a number of different reasons. And his whole approach is to heal the mitochondria. And he does that by creating an oxygen-rich environment. He does that by reducing toxins, by limiting sugar, because cancer cells breathe anaerobically, which means they consume lots and lots of sugar. So we can cut off that supply. So I really think that this is where things are going. We're going to look at the soil in which cancer cells are able to grow, and then we're going to take away the things that allow it to grow and replace it with other things.
Dr. Turner, I just want to clarify before we finish our interview that you're not suggesting that people should turn their backs on conventional cancer treatments.
Not at all. Not at all. I am not against Western medicine at all. Many of the things that the people that I study do are things that you can do very safely alongside conventional medicine. The only exception would be herbs and supplements, which you can use with chemotherapy, but you need to talk to your doctor about them so you can get the dosages right. No, I'm not against Western medicine at all. I'm just studying this group of people who happen to heal without it because we have something to learn from them. I'm not studying them because I think that that's how we should do it or no one should use Western medicine. Not at all. It's just that this control group of radical remission survivors shows us that healing from cancer is possible, and so we need to study them. Many of the people that have read my book are on chemotherapy. They've had surgery. They're on radiation. And all of these things that we're talking about today are things that you can do alongside Western medicine. And I'm a huge proponent of doing whatever is best for your body.
Dr. Kelly Turner, what would you like our listeners to take away from our interview today and your book, Radical Remission, Surviving Cancer Against All Odds?
Probably three things, Joe. First, radical remissions do happen. So I want people to know that these cases are happening and these people are getting well. Number two, I want people to know that these people had things in common. They had these 9 factors in common that they used to try to help heal their bodies. So this wasn't luck. They were working very hard using these 9 key factors to try to help their bodies heal. And third, I just would want people to know that even when things are really, really dire, I hope that they can feel a little better knowing that somewhere in this world, someone who was in their same dire situation turned things around. I think that just knowing it's possible is an incredible, incredible thing to have in your heart.
Dr. Kelly Turner, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Dr. Kelly Turner, a psychotherapist, researcher, and counselor in the field of integrative oncology. She founded the Radical Remission Project and interviewed many individuals who had experienced spontaneous reversals of serious cancer diagnoses. Her best-selling book is Radical Remission, Surviving Cancer Against All Odds.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineers the program. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 955. That number again, 800-732-2334, on the web at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, you can check out prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. Share your own experience or comment on today's show. Look for our Listen and Read offer of a CD of this show together with Dr. Turner's book.
You can also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You'll never miss another People's Pharmacy program again. You can also share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to the People's Pharmacy.